Now, have you ever thought about the economy of sex? You know, like what value we put on it, what it's exchanged for, how much sex is worth. That's a topic in a new book called Premarital Sex in America, How Young Americans Meet, Mate, and Think About Marrying. Now, the authors here argue that the price of sex today is pretty low. Thanks to things like birth control, changing standards, more people are entering that sexual market and hanging out in it for a while before they're actually thinking about marrying. But according to the new book, the losers in the situation are women, especially the ones that want to get married and want to stay a virgin until they get married. Apparently, if women were to simply use their power to influence sexual norms, they could change it all, but they don't. And guess what? The authors of the book are two men. So let's see what women have to say about the economy of sex and whether men really rule the market. Earlier from our studio in Los Angeles, I caught up with Anna Kasparian, host of the Young Turks University. I first asked her if she thinks that sex has become cheap these days.
No, I don't think that sex is cheap these days. I think that people are looking at sex from a different perspective. I just want to note that that article was written by a reporter for the Washington Times, which is known as a conservative news outlet. So, of course, it was a very subtle way of demonizing women who choose to have sex before they get married. And, you know, when I read it, of course, they start blaming birth control pills. Oh, remember the good old days before birth control pills when women didn't open their legs to whoever they wanted. You know, it was a way of making women look like they're the bad guys. That's the reason why marriage is beginning to be perceived as obsolete. And I don't agree with that at all.
But do you think that they have some point in the sense that maybe men really do have the upper hand? You know, we hear so much about how free we are these days in our society, how it's become a much more equal society. But I think at the end of the day, and I think this is probably the overall general perception, doesn't apply to everybody, most girls do want to get married, and the older you get, the more difficult it does become. So do the guys really kind of get the pick of the litter because they get more time to flounder and to explore the sexual market, as you know, is talked about in this book, whereas the longer women explore that sexual market, the longer they're putting off marriage and the smaller their chances of getting married become?
I guess there might be a little credibility in that, but you also have to keep in mind that I don't think that men are actively seeking women who have absolutely no sexual experience. I think that, you know, women are waiting to become educated, waiting to have successful careers, and then they start looking for marriage. And a lot of cases, it might, in some people's perspective, be too late for them to get married. You know, either the men are taken or they're looking for women that are younger. And of course, there's a little credibility to that, but I don't think that the root of the problem is the fact that women are exploring their sexuality and they're having fun with, you know, being free and, you know, gaining that experience before getting married. I don't think that it's fair to blame it on that. And there's also the question of supply and demand. You know, there was a really interesting article written about Russia and how in Russia, actually women outnumber men. So there's a huge issue with women who want to get married, but they can't because men get that pick of the litter. There's so many women looking to get married and so few men that they're able to be picky. So there's a huge problem going on in Russia with that. But in countries like the United States, to blame it on something like, oh, you're having sex too early, you should wait until marriage, I think that's ridiculous. And I really think that's what the article was pushing for.
Yeah, well, I think Russia is a good extreme example in that sense, but I think you see it all over the world. After all, there are more women than there are men, you know, on this planet. And I guess the only opposite of that would be maybe China these days and, you know, the results of what happened with having a one-child policy like that. But do you think, you know, what do you think that says about our society? Because it was obviously this article in the Washington Times and their outlook on it, but they also drew upon this book and what relationships look like these days. That are we gauged in terms of our success by whether we get married or not?
I think some people still look at it that way. I'd like to think that our society has progressed to a point where we've realized that, you know, success doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be married. You know, there was a huge poll that was recently done that showed that marriage is beginning to become obsolete. A lot of people don't see marriage as something that you need to achieve in your lifetime to be deemed successful. And society is changing. So I definitely think that it's not necessary to be perceived as successful anymore. I think we're moving away from that, and I think that's a good thing.
I'm with you there. I guess if there's one point from this book, basically in the conclusion that they came up with that actually does ring true, is that probably it is harder for women out there that want to wait until they get married to have sex to sell that to guys, because these days I guess they have more options, especially since so many people aren't waiting for marriage because they probably don't even plan on getting married. But I want to switch over a little bit and look at another media outlet when it comes to the way that they view women and marriage these days, and that is the mainstream media. That's TV and MSNBC specifically. Let's look at a clip. I just talked about this earlier on the show too, of the investigation they did into why Newt Gingrich's staff decided to bail out on him.
One example, the campaign plane couldn't take off early in the mornings because Callista Gingrich insisted that she had to have her hair done, which pushed back the time when the plane could take off. But more.
Okay, I don't know what's worse. Is it worse that they actually used an investigative team to look into why Newt Gingrich's staff left, and this is the best reasoning that they could come up with, is that Callista needed to get her hair done, or the fact that they're actually blaming it on the fact that Callista needed to get her hair done and not that Newt Gingrich maybe is somebody that, you know, can't control his own marriage, that can't control his own team, and just isn't cut out